Good day and welcome to the latest Straight Up Hangout. Straight Up Hangouts is a weekly event presented by Barrel Strength Design and Pixel and Tonic. I'm Ben Peruzic from Barrel Strength, and today we have with us Brad Bell from Pixel and Tonic, Matt Stein from Working Concept, and Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107. The topic today is critical updates in Craft CMS. I think it was June 7th, 2016, Craft released its first critical update. And we thought we'd pause and talk about what critical updates are, what do we do when they happen, and then get into a bit about how to best structure client and agency relationships to keep your website secure. So to start it off, I think we're going to ask Brad a few questions here. So Brad, what types of, let's start with just more broadly, what types of updating does Craft have, and how do critical updates fit into the update options that Craft presents us?
So when we cut a release, we've got a couple different ways to classify it. You know, most 99% of all the releases are just normal everyday bug fixes and improvements and features and stuff like that. But we built into the release process the concept of critical updates in case there was ever like a security hole that needed to be patched, and we wanted people to update to be aware of it and update as quickly as possible. And so that's what a critical update is. And like you said, we've only ever had to do it once. So it's not something that happens often, but yeah, I mean that's the whole deal behind it.
And you folks take these updates seriously. There's a great post on Stack Exchange about things that Craft does to be secure, and I'll link to it in the show notes. That talks through several things that Craft's doing to be secure. But you said in your response that now and then something comes up, you discover it, you need to mark it as critical and make people aware of it. How do you make people aware of it, and what can they expect when they get a critical update?
So when we mark one as critical, then it gets a special treatment in the Craft client. They'll get a big red, instead of a blue update badge, they get a big red one and a big red banner across the top of all control panel pages saying, there's a critical update available. You should update now, as opposed to just like a normal update where you just get a little blue icon saying there's an update available and no really nag alerts or anything like that.
And I'm going to share my screen quickly here just to show folks who may be interested what that looks like. Here's a Craft install. I installed the version before the critical update, and we can see the Craft control panel has this new red badge and this big red banner across the top of the thing that tells us, hey, something to worry about. This is visible to all admin users and is visible until you upgrade to the version where there's no longer a critical update necessary.
Right, we really want people to update.
Now, does a critical update affect everybody? Should everybody be concerned at a critical update, or just some people?
Well, it depends on the reason for the critical update. So in this particular case, the exploit had to do with the redirect tag, and if you accepted any sort of front-end input on the site, like creating users or creating entries from the front end. So everyone gets the critical update notification and badge because we want everyone to update. If you want more information, more than what's in the the changelog and the release notes, to see if does it really affect me. Like in this case, it had to deal with front-end input. So if your site didn't accept any of that stuff, then it really didn't affect you. So yeah, you can just send an email in to support@craftcms.com. This one also was responsibly disclosed by a security research company. And I gave the link to Ben earlier, so you can link to it in the notes or whatever. But they contacted us privately, said, hey, we're going to publicly disclose this in 30 days, and we had a fix out, I think, in 24 hours or 48 hours or something. So they handled it responsibly, and you can also get more information about the exploit and to see if it affects you just from the public release of it as well, the notes.
So I've pulled up my screen again here. Here's Securify. They notified, as I understand it, they notified Pixel and Tonic, gave them 30 days. Within that time frame, Pixel and Tonic was able to release a fix for the security update, and then they posted what they found, and you can find on their website and kind of an overview of what the issue is. They even give code examples of what code was affected and what they discovered about that code and what needed to be fixed. So I'll add that to the notes as well. Yeah. Great. So then I wanted to then kind of compare Craft. So Craft has, it's been around a couple years now. One critical update. So all of these CMSs have code is hard to manage. There's a lot of it. Things come up. One critical update's a pretty good track record. I thought I'd pull up. WordPress has they release security updates as well. Here's their page. You can kind of see that in the last couple of years they've had several different things that they call security releases that may or may not, probably affect different parts of the user group. One thing WordPress does, and Brad, I don't know if you ever are considering doing this, but I believe WordPress has a way to turn on automatic security updates so that the system just kind of updates in the background if you turn that setting on.
Yeah, and I think they recently added that within the last year or two, maybe. Kind of similar to how Chrome kind of auto updates itself with the, except in the case of WordPress, they do it for, I think, critical and or just minor bug fixes, maybe.
Yeah, they have a couple options for maintenance, small versus larger releases.
Yeah, where so in that case, like the WordPress install, like if you allow it to do that, will update itself without any user intervention. And yeah, that's something we've talked about, and it's on our list to look into. Like I would not be opposed to doing something like that.
And that's an interesting one because it kind of allows people that might not be ready to make a major update to still get the security patch on whatever version of Craft they're on. I believe that's how WordPress's work is, at least. It kind of, you don't need to be updating the latest. It's kind of got this separate update track that just makes sure that critical things are being added or bug fixes are being added.
Yeah, it just gets difficult if your install gets too far behind, and so like if we release this on 2.6, but if you've still got a 2.0 install laying around, then you probably don't want that updating without your knowledge, in the background.
All right. Yeah. So probably an option to turn it on or off is necessary too. Here's Drupal's. I'm not as familiar with these other CMSs, but if you search for critical updates, you can kind of find the page or way they're handling them. Drupal has several. They're marking them as highly critical, moderately critical, less critical. A lot of types of critical, I guess, out there. But yeah, so that any content management system is going to have these types of issues, and this is how Craft makes us and our users aware of these and gives us a chance to update. Brad, is there anything I missed about the general topic that you feel we should touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, part of keeping your Craft installs secure is keeping them up to date, and so it's always we always encourage people to stay on the latest, and critical updates are just another a good example of that.
Great. Matt or Andrew, any security questions for Brad, or anybody out in the audience if you'd like to post a question? We'll try to work it in here.
It's not really a question, but I was curious because you were talking about it. I looked up the way WordPress is doing their updates. And you basically can turn on the auto update to core. It can be either on, off, or minor. And core is just the actual WordPress itself, right? None of the other plugins or themes or that type of thing. But it doesn't look like they have a category for critical. You have, if you turn on the update, the auto updates, true gives you development, minor, and major updates. False disables everything, and minor only updates minor updates, right? So you won't get, it's kind of like Semver in a way. But it doesn't look like they're distinguishing between critical updates unless the page I'm looking at is outdated.
Yeah, I took a quick look. I'm not an expert on this either. I thought I saw a security and minor updates option in the flags that they had. So they might be calling them security updates and not.
Maybe I'm looking at a outdated page then. So never mind.
All right.
I'm curious if Pixel and Tonic have any rough idea of how many installs are completely up to date versus lagging behind or vulnerable to just not having security updates installed. If that's something that's just completely kind of out there.
I haven't ran those numbers in maybe a year, but the last time I checked, there was a pretty surprising number of installs that were, I want to say it was when we released 2.0, like within a month or two of releasing that, like 50% of all installs were already on it. If I were in front of a computer now, I could get new numbers, but yeah, it was surprising to see how many people stay up to date, and I think a good reason for that is like the updating process is generally very reliable and just generally very simple to do, which encourages people to keep clicking the update button, I guess.
It is very fun and satisfying as well.
I got to say, I'm guilty. I've got one client site that's still running some version of 2.4, and unless they want to pay me to maintain it, it's probably going to live out its life running 2.4.
And we're going to let's get into that next here with the discussion of, how there's a lot of different client relationships we might have to manage through a transition like this, and I'd like to get in that. Brad is on a time limit with us today. He's out in the wild, but can happily join us. I had one more question before, whenever you need to run off, Brad. But do plugins have the option to get critical updates, or how are you thinking about plugins that might have vulnerabilities for the craft users?
So right now they don't, because the concept of critical updates in craft is built into our release process. But plugins will probably have like a similar critical update flag if they participate, like in the plugin store when it's out. So when they cut a new release, and if they decide there's a security problem with this, like they can just check a little critical flag, and it'll get some sort of special treatment in the craft control panel as well.
Excellent.
If a plugin wanted to do it now, then maybe they could build like their own,
inject some JavaScript into the control panel. And
oh God! If they were feeling left out,
inject a blink tag up there.
Right, marquee something.
Dear Lord.
All right. Well, maybe let's transition this into a discussion of how we facilitate this process in client relationships now. I do think this adds another layer to the challenge. We can easily, Craft has a nice one-click update that's easy to hit, but not all relationships are free of charge and unlimited in their available time. So how are we handling these things with our clients? Matt or Andrew, do you have any approaches you take for this?
Well, I can tell you what I am doing, and I can tell you what I am transitioning to doing. So what I am doing for some older clients is, I'm kind of just taking care of it. When things need to be updated, I just kind of go in and do it, and I charge them whatever it is to do it. Going forward, I really think what I want to do is a kind of maintenance agreement where there is a fixed amount of money allocated to just kind of general maintenance and improvements so that they don't have to worry about it and I don't ever have to be in the position that I am on some of the sites that I maintain where, I'm just, I haven't updated them because of that, because I've got so many things going on and I just really can't justify going in there and updating them for free.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of similarly structured relationships, or I think we have a combination of both of what you described. There's this one-off hourly kind of arrangement,
right.
And then there's a maintenance relationship where you actually try to establish that there's something that needs to be done, like sweeping the front stoop of your business now and then, and I think the best thing to compare this to is insurance in some sense, or these types of updates to me are more about risk and tolerance for risk. It's very possible that you never update your website and never see a problem from it, but there's a chance that you do see a problem, and when you do, kind of like a healthcare deductible might be like when you get a health scare and need to make it to the hospital, do you want your deductible to be $250 at the door before insurance kicks in, or do you want it to be $2,500 at the door before insurance kicks in? You can try to plan your website in the right relationship so that there's some amount of regular maintenance available to you at a cost that's handling this stuff right out of the box. Or you can say, hey, we don't want to pay the monthly cost of worrying about that. Whenever something comes up, we'll just take it as it comes and decide then if it's worth our time. And
yeah, and one of the things that I found with the clients where, whenever there's an update, I can just charge them an hourly or whatever. I found that the cost to me of mentally switching gears and jumping from one project to another and doing this is kind of significant. So I'm really kind of moving towards, there's a heating and cooling company that I work with. They have this thing called a Gold Seal maintenance thing, right? So you sign up and it costs a certain amount of money per year, depending on the equipment that you have. And that covers a specific number of regular maintenance things, and also will cover emergency stuff that needs to be done. And I'm kind of looking towards moving towards a model like that, where it will compensate me for the work that I'm doing, and then also will kind of reassure the client that hey, this thing is covered if something goes wrong. Because for a decent number of smaller clients, I kind of am their IT department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard one company, and I think there's probably a varying scale of what this number would be, but one company mentioned to me that they charge 20% of the original project cost of building the website per year to maintain the website. So if it costs $10,000 to build the website, they might have a $2,000 a year maintenance plan that they would recommend to their clients of what the client should be budgeting to take care of some of the basic stuff that needs to happen to keep everything running smoothly.
Yeah, and I think that, while that's somewhat arbitrary, it's also probably kind of reasonable, right? Because if the website costs a ton to build, then it's probably complicated, and there probably is, a little bit more going on in there. So, I think, again, that's arbitrary but reasonable, and, maybe I'll look at adopting that.
I think. Go on, Matt.
No, I was just going to say I'm in the situation similar to Andrew, where I have older clients and sites that we did a long time ago. That a lot of times there isn't still even an hourly agreement that works, and I'll just usually take care of it out of some sense of responsibility or something. But it's something I'm trying to figure out too. And I actually like the A lot of the work that I do now is retainer-based, so with the same clients, and it's usually very easy to manage maintenance that way. But I just really like the model of the gold seal heating and cooling model applied to craft updates.
Yeah, or just kind of updates in general. And, I think about it from my perspective. With the heating and cooling company, I like that they're there if anything goes wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like that there is regular maintenance that is being done. And the clients who we build websites for probably will feel the same ways about it, So I think it's a kind of from a different industry, but solving the same problem in a way.
I've been trying to figure out how to deal with the worst case scenario, which is that basically I'm turning over a site to somebody that is going to manage it internally and allegedly take care of it. And my habit that I'm trying to get into now is at least document very clearly, leave a trail back to me, regardless of what the business arrangement is.
Right.
And then also just cover, usually like in the README for a project or something, different strategies for maintaining updates and just kind of like an overview of the site. And my business is just me, so I have to take into account the, what if I finally get hit by a bus scenario and everybody's left trying to figure out what to do with their project. So I'm trying to get better about documentation for the worst case, which is that somebody should be updating and has no idea what to do.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth with and I'm still always looking for better ways to do this, but currently what I'm using is a wiki to document stuff. And one of the reasons why I like that is the syntax for updating it is kind of easy, and the clients can't destroy it, right? If they screw something up in a wiki, you can just roll back to whatever. And the other thing I like about it is that the wiki can run independently of their actual website, right? So let's say that their website crashes and it's dead and it's down. Some of the inside of Craft documentation plugins and methods that I've seen there, I mean, they're great, they're convenient, but if the website is tits up, it would be really useful to be able to access, what the login is and where all that kind of stuff is, right?
What to do in an emergency.
Right. And because I'm paranoid, I back up the wikis locally too. So if all bets are off, at the very least, I've got text files sitting on my drive that I can look up that info. So
what do you use? What wiki?
I use DokuWiki.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I like it is it's simple. It's easy to update. There's actually like an auto update plugin that you can use, so it's a one-click to update the wiki and to update any plugins you use for it. And the other thing I like about it is that it stores everything just in plain text files, which is great from my perspective. Now, there are ways that or there are plugins that you can turn on to make all of those files encrypted if you're really, really paranoid about security and the fact that there are passwords in there. My kind of perspective on that is that if someone is already on your server and they're able to access your files, you're probably screwed anyway. But, for what it's worth, that's what I'm using. And, none of our clients are, we're not talking about like, DEA or defense contractors or anything where, if something is compromised, it's not the end of the world, Sorry, go ahead. You had a question?
No, I haven't found, I like wikis a lot because then also if I'm wrong, which never really happens, but if I was, the client could also update the documentation themselves, or if they learned something and wanted to leave a note, they could. But I've used Confluence and Expression Engine Wiki and Media Wiki and
again, I like DokuWiki because it's simple, it's easy, and it's separate. And I like that because, again, if the website is down, I like the fact that the wiki is still up.
So do you host that for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I just host it on the same VPS that their website is running on. And like I said, if that host or VPS is down entirely, well, I still have a local backup of it anyway. That I just use, kind of rsync to suck down on a regular basis. So it's worked for me. I found that it's a rare client that, at least for a lot of the people I've been dealing with, that actually goes in there and adds stuff to their own wiki. I usually find that I'm documenting it both for them and for myself. I do find that I get fewer questions because whenever they ask something and it's in the wiki, I give them a link to where the answer is rather than answering them. And if it's not in the wiki, then I add it, and then I give them a link to the answer. Right?
And then they can say, thanks, Andrew, but what is RTFM again?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, to show them, that they can help themselves, and it works out pretty well from that regard. I haven't found, again, the wiki has been really useful for me, for future Andrew when I need to do stuff, and useful for them when they need to reference stuff. Most of my clients don't really update it much, but it may just say something about the the kind of clients that I'm typically doing stuff for.
I feel we're talking a lot probably about smaller clients now in this situation of how do they get information and updates, and I think, and they're the ones that are more cost constrained when something comes up and something needs to happen, and I think it's good, it's important that we talk to them and kind of share what their options are, because if they're really budget constrained and they really needed a website for something, they could go in there and hit the one-click update button themselves, and there's a pretty good chance it'll work and everything will go fine. And then there's a chance that it doesn't, but it might be worth the risk to do so. They just need to understand that it's a risk to do so, and it might be a worthwhile risk for their situation. And then, if they have the opportunity to be in a more professional relationship, with a professional firm that can help them through those processes, run tests before just making changes to the live site, and that's a good option as well. So let me ask the next question then. What happens with a larger site? I think this gets into a bigger challenge where it's not just who's hitting the one-click update button to get through to the critical security update. You might have custom plugins developed on the site that need to be tested if things are updated. You might have advanced logic around the area that the update affected that needs to be reworked or rethought or something like that. And it might not be I need an hour of time or a couple $100 to do this. It might be, oh my gosh, there's a couple thousands or tens of thousands of dollars worth of custom development work that really needs to be considered.
Right.
How do we feel we should be approaching these types of relationships?
Well, again, I can tell you what I do, and I'm really interested to hear what you two do as well. But typically, I do all of the updates I do in local dev, where I've got Vagrant running on my development machines at home. So for larger sites, or not necessarily even larger, but just more complicated in terms of the things and the moving parts and the things that can go wrong, what I do is I do all of those updates in dev, and I test them. I make sure everything works to my satisfaction, and then I push them to a staging server. And that is the company's chance to then test things out, make sure nothing is wrong, give the green light, and then we push from the staging server to production. And I wait for the green light from the client before it moves from staging to production. And before I even put it up on staging, again, I make sure that I have tested it to a reasonable degree in local dev before any of that kind of process happens.
What are you doing with the databases in these situations?
Yeah, it depends on exactly what the workflow is, but a lot of the times what I will do is I will just pull just before I do the testing, I will pull the database from production into dev. I've got just a shell script that just sucks it down and does it. So I'll be testing something very, very, very close to exactly what they have up and running there. But I'm never pushing that database to production, right? I'm just copying production so that local dev and staging have a reasonably up-to-date copy of it that's going to match what they have, and then push the changes down. And by doing it that way, all of the upgrade steps, all of the plugin migration steps, all of the craft migration steps, all of that mirrors what is going to happen on production when the changes are actually pushed down. So what are you doing, Matt?
Pretty much the same thing. I pull down the production database locally. Depending on how risky or not risky it is, I'll stage the change. Usually I'll just update staging just to keep it mirroring production, unless we have like a different branch staged or something. And then pretty much synchronize. So I'll run the update locally, update that database, and put that back in production. And try to minimize the round trip. And it usually works pretty smoothly.
Yeah, if possible, often when making database updates, it's easiest to just coordinate with the client, freeze database changes, and do it. In the case of this latest critical update, that might have been a little, like for the clients that it affected, the issue was that the redirect tag was creating a vulnerability on sites that had user-facing content, so people that could update entries on the front end or were accepting guest entries. And those are always a little trickier depending on how much traffic a site gets, because you can tell the client don't update your database, but you can't tell the users to stop submitting stuff from the front end unless you take the site offline and give them a message to do it. So.
But unless we're actually pushing the database to production, it doesn't really matter, right?
Well, yeah, so I think, yes, you just need to make sure that the window that you're making the change with. So I do think in those situations you can still do a workflow like this, but it requires more, you take that live database, test your updates, make sure they all work, and then maybe check the areas of the website that might have received user-generated content, and if they haven't, you could make the switch, or you could take the website off for a few minutes and redo your update process locally after you've tested and learned that there's not any blockers or other things that you might have to work out when you're doing that process. I think the key thing is kind of doing the test run, though, and making sure that when you update, you don't accidentally break a whole section of the site while you have the live site down and are trying to do it quickly. You want to solve those problems before you.
Privately. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to be the only one who sees the fail.
I feel in the context of the client relationships for these, I kind of see three scenarios. One is the don't update scenario, okay, well, it costs too much. And I probably should tone down I don't think a critical update is going to cost you $10,000 of development work. You know, there might be scenarios where you do have to test things more rigorously, but it might be enough to cause trouble with, hey, can I do this for you quickly type relationship with the client. But I'd be surprised if the change is necessary for fixing a bug or a critical bug like that would really change the behavior of the website enough to be costing too much time here. So I think some people don't update when they get hit with the cost, and you'll see that. Others kind of can fall back on these maintenance relationships, and so I think your best option as a web firm is really push for communicating to the client about what that maintenance relationship is, whether it's a monthly fee or a la carte. When something goes wrong, you come to us and this is how we help you. But I think the other category I see this a lot is, and I think it's kind of a failure of communication in the first verse, is we inherit a lot of clients that I think came from bad communication around topics like this and felt that they were getting screwed by their last relationship because they just wanted to do a simple thing and it wasn't possible. And when you inherit the project, you realize that, just a few things weren't updated properly, and there was a lot of confusion around how the client might have been thinking about those things and what their options were, and they didn't really understand the trade-off between risk and the amount of time necessary to do something.
Yeah, and where I find that we've been primarily talking about critical updates with craft, but where I find that these kind of things not really spiral out of control, but ends up being kind of a time sink is when we're also going through and we're updating all the plugins. And then the testing matrix becomes, interesting, right? You can either just update everything at once, and just pray that it works, or you can actually take the approach you should be doing, which is you update one piece at a time, and then you test everything, and then you go back and you do it again and again and again for whatever needs to be updated. And I think that I really think that it's a good thing that all of this stuff is kept up to date, because we've discussed this in many different venues, different hangouts and such, but keeping your site working and not vulnerable to various security issues, the best thing you can do is just keep stuff up to date. I mean, it really is the best thing that you can do. And to make yet another analogy that we don't need, I mean, it's kind of like the warranty on your car, right? So they will, in order for your warranty to be valid, you have to come in and do these regular maintenance things. And the reason is very similar to a website, whereas if you have a car for 5 years and you never bring it in for any maintenance, the things that could be potentially wrong and the rat's nest when regular maintenance has not been done could be way more expensive and way more time consuming than if you had been coming in and these incremental things had been done. And it's really the same thing for websites. So I'm kind of trying to pitch my clients on getting that done. I mean, obviously it's more money for me, but honestly, maintenance is not my favorite thing to do anyway. But I really think it's the best thing for them, Yeah,
I think if in the insurance analogy, it's actually not more money for you in the things crashed and burned and they needed to call you in with urgent last-minute work to fix it all.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of a design issue too. I mean, I've become very plugin stingy, and I only try to add plugins when I know I absolutely need them for something.
Right.
Just because I'd rather be taking the fiat in for maintenance sometimes than the Winnebago. Or if somebody's going to skip out on maintaining it, if there are fewer parts that could catch fire, then that's also good. So I think some of it's design responsibility, even though I feel like the business relationship is the more important part.
Now, Matt, I'm a biased plugin developer on some levels, but also I'm a jaded plugin user of having many plugins die on me as well. I do feel I've seen a lot of sites where people have gone to great lengths to not use plugins and added a ton of complexity as well. Like the amount of things that people are doing with Pixel and Tonic's contact form, for example. Like I look at some of those things and I'm like, oh my gosh, how much time could they have spent on this when, like, I know of a plugin that we built that you could do the same thing almost with one tag in a couple settings. And
well, that's why I call it a design issue and not an exercise, insanity.
Well, see, here's the thing, though. I mean, nothing changes, right? Whether you decide to implement some functionality in a plugin or you decide kind of to just write it yourself in Twig code, nothing changes in terms of there still is this mass of code. All that's changing is who needs to maintain it, right?
Who's responsible.
I think that you need to pick your battles wisely, because I too have seen stuff where people have decided to just kind of do everything themselves, and they've ended up with this mess that I can guarantee you that they're not going to be enhancing it, or the difficulty that it's going to take for them to enhance it will be huge. So likely it's just going to be written and it's just going to sit there. Whereas if it's, and again, depending on what it is, if it's compartmentalized off into a plugin, very often the plugin developer will be adding functionality to it in ways that you can benefit from. So, I believe it or not, even though I do develop plugins, I also am somewhat plugin stingy. And I just look at it from a cost-benefit analysis. Is this thing something that is really going to save me time and is really going to add functionality to my website? And if it is, I'm going to install it and I'm going to use it, assuming that it's a plugin that is reliable from a vendor that I trust. So really, I try to be pragmatic about it. Go ahead.
It might be worth expanding this. I think we've been talking about Craft security updates, and Craft has this nice red button and giant flag that they pop up for us. But it's also possible your your server has a security update that's necessary, or a bug comes up in a plugin. There's a lot of other areas that these relationships with clients have to take into account. It's just really convenient when their control panel turns bright red and has a big flag for us to be able to say, like, hey, that's something you should worry about. But a lot of the time, any update can become this: how much time is necessary to be spent on it, and who's responsible for fixing that. If a client says there's this security hole in Craft to you, you have a relationship about communicating to Pixel and Tonic that something needs to be done about it, and that critical work is now you're almost managing the relationship with Pixel and Tonic and the client to help the product get to the right stage. Or with a respectable plugin developer, the same thing. Something needs to be fixed, and you're working with them. You're not on the hook to spend hours to fix something, perhaps. If you're doing these custom implementations with a lot of customized code to avoid a plugin, great. I think there's plenty of use cases for that as well. But then when something small goes wrong or big goes wrong, you're on the hook, and there's a general, I feel there's always a market rate for what you're doing, and if the perceived market rate, if your cost of making the update is higher than the perceived market rate of the client or who owns the website, you've got a challenge in what needs to be communicated about.
Well, I think that's the great part, and one of the strengths about Craft and the Craft community and Craft plugins in general is that it's very easy to take advantage of a lot of smart work, and it makes me look smarter in the stuff that I do. So you can easily just taking advantage of lots of smart people that are working on stuff and keeping it up to date. I've just learned with previous attempts on different platforms that sometimes a plugin can also be like quicksand, because you have to be willing to maintain it yourself should somebody completely bail on it.
And I believe me, I have experienced some of the most horrible days in my life, kind of doing what I'm doing now, for exactly that, right? There's Cartthrob for example, plugin for Expression Engine. One of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life, in terms of the developers just basically abandoned it, stuff just didn't work, and I wrote a whole plugin just to make that plugin actually work on my client site. And I mean, it was horrible. So you're right. When if the developer kind of punts, then you've got a problem. And I also had another thing happen again with a Expression Engine plugin that did auctions, and the thing was just never finished, right? And part of my bid to my client was, well, I can do it for this price, but only if we use this plugin to handle all of that auction functionality. Come to find out, the thing was half broken. Could never know that until we were, all the way down in implementing it, but had kind of the same issue that you're just talking about there, Matt, where I had to then maintain it and do stuff about it. But I don't think that should be something that should turn people off from using plugins. I think that it just means that, well, we have to do a little bit more research up front to make sure that these things are actually working the way they're supposed to. I mean, a lot of the plugins that I've written, I wrote them because I was sick of setting up this stuff every time. An example that Ben and I are familiar with is this SEO stuff, right? You can do all of that in templates, right? You set up the fields every time, and you add the stuff to your template code, and whatever, and all of that stuff you can do yourself in Craft, which is great. But what I was finding was that I was spending a ton of time setting all this stuff up, and then also if I went back and I found some other really cool thing I wanted to implement, then going back to every single site where I custom templated this stuff and trying to merge the changes and make it all work without breaking, I mean, it just ended up being horrible. And that's a case where then what you do is you roll that off into a plugin, and you do that because it's a very discrete thing that can be compartmentalized, and you can maintain it once and get that benefit of it being updated in a number of places. So, I mean, I think the answer is really it depends. I've seen custom development that will bite people in the ass from the point of view that if they ever want to add something to it, it's going to take quite a bit of work, especially to then push it to every site where they end up using it. And I've also seen the reverse, as I mentioned, where plugins they fall by the wayside and they're not updated, and if you use it, you're screwed. So
I think I think we've kind of reframed how we think about, you learn as you build your plugins and whatnot, and I've realized in our agency relationships and our plugin relationships that there's always going to be more features requests for your plugin, but at a certain point, the cost of adding those features is way beyond the value of even having the plugin and trying to sell it or whatever. So you need kind of a flexible. You need at some point your plugin has to become either not the right thing for the job or have a very flexible way to extend it. And I've found that that's the line that you really need to be careful with clients and communicate well to clients, because you can say, hey, we're going to use this e-commerce plugin or SEO plugin or form plugin or whatever it is to save ourselves time in doing this for you.
Right.
But there's a point where we're actually heavily customizing that too, and that's where the value of your product is, or the value of your experience, or the value of whatever you're trying to do that's unique to what you're trying to do. And if you come back to me and say, hey, I need to add a new form or a new product, well, great, the plugin already does that. But if you come back to me and say, hey, we need this custom part of how it works to behave differently, we're back in custom development territory. And it's, even though we're using a plugin, it doesn't matter. That's custom development territory, and it's going to cost like it is custom development territory.
Right, and again, and you are basically kind of reiterating what I said, in that the work still needs to be done somewhere. It's a matter of where that work is done, and Matt, that's something you might actually consider, Matt, is that if you don't really trust third-party sources to some extent, that's fine. You can do whatever custom development that you want to do, but you very well might find, for instance, that some of the things that you are doing in your templates, you should just write your own custom plugin to do it, so that it will handle that functionality for you. You will feel good because you are in control of it, but then you will reap the benefits of it being compartmentalized and be able to push it to other client sites with very minimal work on your part. So when I look at this stuff, I don't think the question is should I use a plugin for this feature or not. I think the question is really, should I use a third-party plugin for this feature or not? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because you might some of the stuff that you're doing, you might be way better off if you don't want to use a third-party plugin. You might be way better off writing your own.
And that's what I do sometimes. I mean, I don't claim to write plugins, because compared to the stuff you guys are doing, mine are just usually little tinker toys that are solving a very specific problem that I've managed to reuse. And I'm not talking about Taggregate. But,
yeah, we killed that one.
Yeah, that deserved to die. But usually I'm just writing very small ones that, even if I can't trust myself to update them, they made sense to be a packaged little thing that I could reuse. And
all I mean is think about where the work is being done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there are certain things that I just got sick of having to replicate the same thing over and over again in every template, and was wasting hours doing that with every new project. And then if I ever wanted to add something, multiply that by every site that I was maintaining, and I'm like, you know what, this should be a plugin. And if you find yourself doing that for any kind of the things that you do on your site, if you don't want to use a third-party plugin, that's fine. But consider writing your own, because again, it's where you do the work. It's not, does this work have to be done? It's what little kind of compartment should this work be in? And if it's something that you're replicating on just about every site that you're doing, that probably should be a plugin.
Mm-hmm.
Go on, Matt.
Or if I'm just reading everything that Marion's ever written and working on the worst twig macro, it's still a design issue, right? So it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's still deciding where the work needs to be done. I'm agreeing.
Yeah.
I was discussing just kind of relationships with Leslie Camacho, who's managed a couple of these big CMS projects, and we were discussing there's an interesting thinking about how we're priced to clients and work to clients as agencies is very different than how software companies price work for themselves. So you might have an agency relationship where something takes a day of time or 2 days of time or something, and if it goes over budget that by a day, you're in kind of deep trouble, or you're in a big percentage overage. You got to talk through what that means. In the software, building software, it's often structured very differently. If you have a problem, well, the software still doesn't work, and you got to have somebody work on it for 2 more days to get it to work. And I think we're in a bit of a challenge in a position as agencies sometimes because we're implementing software, and sometimes it's the underlying software that needs the work, and sometimes to get it working, it just needs to take the time that it does. And often our agency relationships aren't structured around the value of taking the time to build out the software. It's around the value of the final implementation of what's there. So I think it's just important to be aware of that, because if you're not framing the custom development parts of your relationship well, you can easily get into that need to get the software working, but the agency relationship just doesn't really make that easy in the hourly or amount of time available.
So you're saying that the money isn't there to do it the right way? Is that kind of what you're saying, or?
I'm saying that the clients that are hiring you to build their website don't see the small feature they need in your plugin as a three-day abstract challenge to build the best version of that reusable feature. They see it as I just needed an extra word added to my SEO metadata. Why is it taking so long to do this? And you're like, well, because it's this type of metadata, not that kind, and it's an image, not that, and there's all these other things that are going on, and they're just like, well, I just want that one thing on my website. And often you could log into the template and do that in a minute, but if you wanted to make it reusable, it's going to take you a day or two. And you need to find how I don't think everybody's in the position of having commercial plugins to say, okay, I'm going to invest that day or two to do this. A lot of people are in I created a custom plugin for this and I need to get it done. Otherwise, I'm just, lowering my own profitability on the project and making it less likely that I should even have this client.
So semi-related to this, and I've been in this situation in a number of cases where maybe the plugin needs a custom feature or whatever it is. I've been in the situation where if it's something that is kind of a greater good problem, something that if I solve it, it's going to benefit a number of people, I actually charge my clients less for that development work. I with the proviso that I own this code. Right? So I usually give them 2 options when something custom needs to be done. I will bill you at this rate, and you own it exclusively. It's yours. And I will bill you at this lower rate, but I own it. And that's kind of my small way of attacking that, because there is some client work that I've done that has benefited lots more people than just the client. And I don't charge them the full price for that reason, if that makes sense.
I've done that a few times with schedule, where if I don't even know what I've done this on, but I know it's been the case where I've built something and the client has a feature request for their specific implementation, and I will say, okay, you can get in the queue, and it can be an update that I add to it when it's time. Or if you want to pay for the development of this thing, that I can do that, and we can make it available for your thing faster, and on a schedule that is you're paying for pretty much. So you can get the paid, more attention, more immediacy update, or I can add that to the queue, and we can you can get that whenever you want. And usually that's been a very easy choice, whatever they've chosen.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Agree. All right, gentlemen, shall we wrap up?
I'm good. We got a little bit off the rails of critical updates, but I still think potentially it was a useful discussion.
Yeah, I think all updates in general are critical a lot of the time, even when they're not in our relationships. And
Right.
I think we made that transition in the conversation there too. But yeah, hopefully valuable to folks.
And hopefully Brad
And
didn't fall off a cliff or step on a rattlesnake or, whatever.
Get mauled by a bear.
Get mauled by a bear, yeah.
hopefully
We're
he'll
laughing
reach
for some other reason.
out if that happens, and we'll get to see it in all its glory. All right. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. Next week, we're going to be talking about design systems and crafts role and consistency and quality with Travis Gertz from Louder Than 10. This event will be posted live on the Straight Up Craft website. If anybody out there is interested in doing a code review, either of plugin code, twig code, content architecture, or anything, we now have 2 links in the sidebar of the Hangouts on the Straight Up Craft website. You can click on those if you want to suggest a topic or submit an idea that you'd like to do a code review with. We get Brandon Kelly on here and a small group of us to review your code and try to improve it and try to share with everybody out there and help us all learn and become better craft developers. So hope some of you take us up on that. This is a weekly event.
Matt should do it again. Matt should do it again so that we can get rid of another plugin he's written.
Yes, we're merciless, but it's a valuable and fun experience. So
I learned something.
I did too. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for coming out. Straight Up Hangouts is a weekly event presented by Barrel Strength Design and Pixel and Tonic. We'll see you next week.